College football nerds talking Texas A&M and Florida. And I want to let you know, Florida fans, we told you this in our preview. Please, if you haven't already, hit that subscribe button. Helps us out a ton. But also, remember, we need your score predictions so we can mix it up with you in the comments. We are one of the few channels out there that really likes to get at you in the comments, and we will be snarky as hell on Twitter too. So find us there. The real snark, the kind of angry snark, that's me. Josh is too nice to do that. All right, Josh. So we've seen enough of Florida to feel at least somewhat validated. We picked them to win the East in our preview. We've seen enough of A&M with Jimbo Fisher and Kellen Mond to know that they are who they are. And we saw Kellen Mond dropping dimes on Alabama. I know people were going to see that score, especially I think at one point it was like 52-17 or something like that, and think it was just a murder fest and all this. But Alabama's defense played well, and Kellen Mond still had a day. So I was talking to you in the open, and we were talking about this game, comparing notes. And my point was, and Florida fans, I'm not saying this is going to happen, but my point was, when we were discussing texting back and forth during the Alabama and Texas A&M game, I said, Kellen Mond's doing his thing against Alabama that he always does, but it feels to me like anytime Alabama needs to go get a touchdown to keep a 2-score lead, they're going to be able to do it. With Florida, I think the same thing is at play. Florida fans might get frustrated because they might see A&M put a 30-burger up on the board. But in my mind, I feel like A&M, whenever they need to keep a touchdown or two ahead, they'll just go out and get another touchdown. Am I crazy? Do you have a different perspective on this? Let's get into it.
Yeah, you were talking about it before. Now, you said, your exact words. Correct me if I'm wrong, but you were saying, Texas A&M, it wouldn't shock me if, Florida scored 60 points and won this game. Or
the exact quote was, A&M could score 35 in this game and still lose by 3 touchdowns.
Right, and I kind of was like, wait, what? Do you mean Florida's going to score 3 touchdowns? And I mean, what Daniel meant and what he explained was, no, not that he expects that this game is going to be 30-50, just that it's in the realm of possibility. And
yep.
I agree with that based off what I saw from the Alabama A&M game. Like he said when we were texting back and forth, Alabama was pretty well being aggressive on offense, but especially early. But it also kind of felt like they weren't quite foot on the accelerator in that game, to be honest. When they wanted to hit a play-action shot, they generally had it. And there weren't many instances in that game where they dropped back on one of those deep passes and they didn't let it fly. They weren't sacking Mac Jones on those plays. They weren't forcing a scramble and a dirt ball or a checkoff that much either. Very quietly, I think they pretty much threw the deep balls they wanted to throw, and they pretty much hit them all on open guys. And that's kind of the concern, because I think Florida can do the same thing. They've got, obviously in Pitt's one of the better receivers, if not the best receiver this year. Trask is a really good quarterback. I mean, my first question for A&M is, before we get into anything else, is the secondary play gonna create an unwinnable situation where Florida can just get a touchdown anytime they want one?
Yeah, and that was my concern. If I'm an A&M fan and I watched that Alabama game, my thought was, gosh, it's 2nd and 22. Alabama's backed up to their 14-yard line. We got them right where they want them, and boom, Jalen Waddle right down the middle, 86 yards. I think my math is right there. So that's my concern. It had a lot of feel of we said the same exact thing when Alabama played Oklahoma a couple years ago in the playoffs. Like, Oklahoma came roaring back, but then Alabama, when they needed to keep a 2-score lead, they just went and got another touchdown. Now, one thing you mentioned and one thing we noticed with A&M this Saturday was they are no slouch on the offensive and defensive lines. So I want you to unpack that a little bit, considering Florida's played some good offenses so far, but they haven't played good teams who are great on the offensive or defensive line. So talk about that a little bit.
And I think it's a fair question, right? I mean, Florida, you play Ole Miss. Ole Miss was a pretty good run defense last year. They still lose some guys. They're not great on both sides of the ball. Texas A&M, weird mixed bag. I mean, they play Vandy, who's bad. Frankly, Vandy is bad. And they play Alabama, who's probably really good. The offensive line is awesome. And so you kind of get a Jekyll and Hyde thing to gauge with A&M, but at least you got that good data point. Florida, you don't really have a good data point. And what I saw from A&M at least was with Leal in particular and Bobby Brown, you got a pass rusher, a run stuffing ability that you got some dudes, right? I mean, you got guys that can create real disruption even against an elite team. Obviously, they didn't do fantastic giving up 52 points to Alabama, but they actually held their own pretty well at the line of scrimmage. Florida hasn't played anyone like that or resembling it. And if you're a Florida fan, you're very aware of the fact that your offensive line has had issues in recent years in pass protection. And like in Georgia games in particular, that's shown up and caused a lot of issues. I think Florida, I will say on their end with their lines, one, I'm still questionable about the offensive line. They haven't run the ball particularly well. They've been serviceable. They haven't been fantastic. Defensive line against South Carolina, I'm not as high on South Carolina as you. And it was concerning to me that Harris was getting 4.5 yards per carry because South Carolina was not running the ball in general well this year. I mean, South Carolina against Tennessee was only 2.5 yards per carry. Florida as a team, they were about 3.5 yards per carry. That was accounting for negative yardage. But Tennessee was much more effective than Florida was at stopping South Carolina. And really, South Carolina had nothing productive. So I think there's an angle there. I think on both sides of the ball, A&M may be a lot better than Florida. Again, though, do you think? I mean, is that enough to really sort of offset the advantages or consistencies that with like Blades of opting out at the secondary for A&M, and then Osmond opts out for A&M that Florida may have with skill players, particularly the receiver position?
No, but to me, it's something to watch for and something to at least frame your expectations. Like Alabama fans saw their defensive line just destroy Missouri. Will Anderson coming on as a freshman and really getting after the quarterback, having a lot of pressure. And then they faced this A&M offensive line. I think that they said it was 111 starts combined between them. And those guys held point against Alabama. And so they're probably, for at least some of this game, going to hold point against Florida. And I'm just trying to frame this discussion and put a frame of mind around Florida fans when they go into this game and say, okay, if we can't have our way offensively early on, here's why. Because, they might see that score and think that A&M is a trash team when, look, I'm not as high on A&M this year as we have been in the past, but it's still a team that recruits really well and has a quarterback who is, when he's on, is really on. And he's kind of the opposite than what they've seen lately in Florida seen in the first two games, in that he can make the hero throw, but maybe not the peanut butter and jelly throw to keep a drive going. He can make the hero throw and pop you where they're not expecting. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about really this A&M offense against the Florida defense that we've seen have some concerns early on. If in my mind I'm thinking A&M can score a lot of points in this game, and you're not as high on A&M, tell me why, and tell me how you think it's going to go for A&M offensively against this Florida defense.
I think for my part, I think the biggest advantage A&M has in running the ball. So in their opener, Texas A&M, it was a weird game, right? You look at that Vandy score and you look at what I think 17-12. A lot of people felt like A&M must not be very good offensively. I mean, look at the fact that they only score 17 points in a ball game. Look at the fact they only beat Vanderbilt by 5. We broke that down a little bit going in the Alabama game. Vanderbilt played a game to shorten it, right? They ran the ball a lot. They ran the clock down before they snapped it. Texas A&M only had 9 drives in that game, which is really low. I mean, normally you get more like 12. In those 9 drives, A&M fumbled the ball 4 times. So now you only have 5 drives that you could score on. A&M scored on 3 of the 5. They ran the ball for about 6.8 yards per carry. Now that's 2 yards per carry more than Georgia just did against Auburn. Yet, the scores are totally different, right? And the perception's totally different. It really came down to mistakes from Texas A&M in that game. The fact that they did fumble the ball 4 times in the game, the fact that it was a shortened game. I think A&M needs to run it. They need to run it more consistently. They ran well against Vanderbilt. They didn't run it enough. I mean, they threw, I think, 40 something passes. They only had 27 rushes. Not very many of those were to the tailbacks. Now, they didn't run it well against Alabama for the most part, but they didn't try very hard. The combination, though, was Spiller, who's a very, very good traditional back, and then Ainias Smith, who I think quietly is probably one of the most explosive players in the conference. Converted receiver. He's only 190 pounds, but playing tailback isn't very, very difficult to cover on sweeps. And as a receiver out of the backfield, he is a receiver. You're not going to really cover him with a linebacker. I think if they lean on that run game, given the success South Carolina had, I think they can move the ball well. And Mond needs to be throwing to offset the run, and they don't need to be leaning on Mond's arm because he's not consistent enough. And if you do that, Mond's going to make bad or throws or stupid decisions and kill drives on his own. I think probably that's where A&M goes, and personally, I think that's enough to get them to about 30 points. I'm just not sure, as much as I say it's where they should go, I guess I'm just not confident that that's something Jimbo Fisher's going to do because he hasn't done it before.
For me, it's one of those things where I know how much talent Mond has, but the lack of consistency and the fact that we'll see A&M put up 27, 30 points against Alabama, and then the next week beat Arkansas 20-17. I feel like that's a pattern with A&M, especially with Mond, for the last 3 years that I don't know that I'm ready to back off of. So I have concerns. Yes, I think they're talented offensively enough to give Florida fits. Now, I think also what we saw with Alabama, the fact that A&M is not talented enough at wide receiver, Alabama didn't have to do a whole lot to consider the wide receivers. It was Ainias Smith getting open or in coverage busts that was really their whole offense. Florida might have a little bit of that too, where they don't have to really do anything crazy bracketing receivers, or they can afford to pull a safety down. That for me might take away the game for Texas A&M, as well as the fact that Mond's already had a good game, so he's due 11 for 34 for 180 yards kind of game. Here's a bigger concern for me if I'm A&M, and we can talk about this. Real quick, true or false, you think Florida's going to score at least 35 points in this game? False. Okay. Well, then that's one thing. Because for me, my thought was, if Florida is able to score at will, which I think they might be able to, is A&M equipped to come back in that sort of situation? Or if they get buried, is it going to be over for them? But your thing is more interesting. Talk about why you don't think they can score 35.
Well, at this point, I think you're going to force me to sort of get my prediction. So I've pretty much made up my mind. I'm going to pick A&M in this game. And I think it's going to be, I've got it about 31-28 A&M. Personally, I think there's a real problem here where if you are Florida, I don't know that your offensive line is going to hold up that great. I am really concerned by the fact that they didn't look dominant on the offensive line in the first couple games. They weren't playing good teams. And Trask is a really good, steady quarterback. He's a little bit limited, and he tried some things against Ole Miss that would throw picks against better teams. I don't know that A&M's a great team. In fact, I'm pretty sure they're not necessarily a phenomenal team defensively in a lot of ways, but they got a good front seven. And they're going to hit some plays with Pitts, and I'm sort of conceding that they're going to score about 30 points. I just don't think they're going to be able to win the line of scrimmage enough to be overly effective. I just really think with what A&M has on the defensive line, and like in that Vandy game, Vandy had some success, yeah, but it was in spurts, and for the most part, Vandy really couldn't move the ball in that game. They had a couple of good drives, and again, A&M fumbled the ball a ton. It didn't really matter. Again, what do you want to take from it? Vandy's terrible. Even like Pitts, right? Pitts is a phenomenal receiver because of his ability to high point the ball. He's a phenomenal target in the red zone. He's really, really tough to defend as a possession guy. I don't know that he's going to burn you over the top the way Alabama was doing with Waddle and Smith. I mean, those guys are burners, And they could get behind the defense and outrun them. Pitts is not necessarily. That's not to say that he's not fast. He's not Waddle fast. Who's track star fast. And Pitts will make you a good play, but it won't necessarily be a scoring play. It'll be like a 40-yard chunk, and then you got to pick up and do it again. And without a consistent run game, I'm just not sure that's enough to consistently move the field and score 35 or more, especially if A&M shortens the game, because you're probably talking about touchdowns on more than 50% of the drives there.
Yeah, it's rare, y'all. Josh and I, it's funny when we do our picks a lot of times and we don't give our scores to one another before we do the show. We're usually like super close on the score and the winner. This one we're fairly divergent. I think Florida wins pretty easily, but gives up a lot of points. I could also not be shocked if A&M comes in and does their A&M thing, where just like they almost lose to Arkansas, that kind of thing. They've already almost lost to Vandy, and I have a hard time thinking, for all of the weird things, the 3 fumbles against Vanderbilt that they lost and how variable that is, they still only beat Vanderbilt by 5 points, and Vanderbilt is awful. And they did hang with Alabama here and there, but one score was on a short field after an interception. I do agree with you that Florida isn't exactly equipped. It's one of those things where Florida could really struggle with a team that Alabama blew out and then turn around and give Alabama all they want. So I see what you're saying there, and I do agree that Alabama is uniquely equipped to expose the weaknesses that A&M has, but at the end of the day, they still have a lot of weaknesses, especially in their back 4 or 5. I think A&M scores some points. I think Florida scores in buckets. Give me 42-27 Florida in this one. I think early it's going to be frustrating watch for Florida fans who just saw that Alabama game and think they're going to just steamroll them. I think they're going to pull away late, but early on, I think it's going to be kind of like that South Carolina game should have been. Blow for blow is how that game was going until South Carolina stubbed their toe. I think A&M's going to last longer in that trading touchdown scenario, but Florida ultimately pulls away. All right, so let's say you're wrong. It's happened before, I know. Let's say you're wrong and Florida wins this game. If Florida wins, do you think it's more likely a high-scoring affair or it's kind of a slugfest?
I think it's probably high-scoring. I think if it's low-scoring, then my concerns with the offensive and defensive line are in play. And the moment, if that's in play, then I think Florida's kind of in trouble. Ultimately, let me make a point here. You're saying that I'm a little crazy. One, I think it's weird that Florida's only favored by 6, given the public perception of it. And I'll say we give our predictions and without looking at the betting lines, and the betting lines come out when we do the show. I think it's interesting that I gave my pick without knowing the line, the over-under, and the over-under is 58. So my line is right at the over-under. I'm a point and a half over that. So I think this is expected to be a 30-point game. And I think if it's lower than that, it means A&M's holding point at the line of scrimmage. If it's above that, that probably means this is a high-scoring game that Florida's offense is working effectively. And with a 6-point spread and with that over-under being what it is, I'll note that the Vegas lines are not set for this to be a high-scoring game and a Florida win by a significant margin. So I think you interpret those two things together, and this is expected to be like a 30-24 game.
Really, you've been fighting with Ohio State fans for 2 years now about A&M, that you're really just, I think you're picking them so you can have something to show them. But then all they're going to do is say that Florida and the SEC is overrated. The second you're truly vindicated with A&M, be it this game or another, it's just going to be that the SEC is overrated. Florida fans can appreciate this because they did this to Florida 2 years ago all season. Florida and Kentucky were trash and overrated. SEC's overrated. Then literally Ohio State's second and third best opponents played Kentucky and Florida Florida murdered Michigan, and Kentucky beat Penn State. All right, y'all, that's it for us on Florida and Texas A&M. Let us know in the comments what you think the score is going to be, and let us know if you think Josh is crazy or if he's got something going with the thought that A&M might be able to exploit some things from Florida that we haven't seen so far this year. Thanks so much, y'all. Have a great week, and God bless.